Hello, good evening to everybody. So we are going to commence the session 4B about the disaster preparedness. I think this will going to be a very interesting technical session. As I see that there are about 5 presenters will be presenting about the disaster preparedness. As we all know that the most important thing is to get the preparedness for the disasters. So it can be decided by the technological as well as the cultural, as you know. So how we are matured on the technologically and how we are rich on our culture, those things can decide on that how we are prepared. So that it is a techno cultural, I mean the area that we have to be interested. So in our session there are 5 presentations. So each presenter will be give about 10 minutes for the presentation, and there will be about 5 minutes for the questions and answers. So listeners can put their questions onto the chat box, and we can see the questions. And what we can do is that we'll take about 3 presentations, and after that we'll give you some time for the questions. So I am chairing the session with Mr. Hashim. So he will be helping me to get all the questions, and he will be conducting all of these question and answer sessions. I will just guide you with your time and other thing, and so that we are going to commence that. Shall we start with the first presentation? That is a drawing prevention and water safety in Sri Lanka, challenges and recommendations. So that the Lienarati C, Jaivi race, Nanaka race, Vijayaratna is and the Java the name. I suppose Mr. Lienarati will be present in the will present this one.
Thank you, co-chairs. Ladies and gentlemen, my abstract presentation is on drowning prevention and water safety Sri Lanka, challenges and recommendations. In fact, this is a joint paper with Mr. Sunil Jayavira from Disaster Management Center, Asanka Nanayakar and Sanath Vijayaratna are from Life Saving Association Sri Lanka, and Mevan Jayawardena is from Life Saving Victoria, Fort Melbourne, Australia. This is the presentation outline, background, methodology, implementing modality, analysis and discussion. In the background, I briefly explained the history of past drowning impacts of Sri Lanka, risk of drowning, and the need of a national plan of action. In the global context, in 2014, an estimated 372,000 people died from drowning, make it the third leading unintentional injury killer. There are approximately 42 drowning deaths every hour. So WHO has introduced 10 actions to prevent drowning, 5 community-based approaches, and 5 policy legislation and research approaches. The report also highlights that poor quality drowning data have contributed to neglect the drowning prevention research, and also the estimated death toll is all the more alarming because official data categorization method for drowning exclude intentional drowning, death due to suicide, homicide, and drowning death caused by flood disaster, and also transportation incidents like boat carrying migrant refugees and capsizing during so-called irregular transportation. While there has been some success globally in focusing attention on drowning prevention, efforts have mainly targeted recreational settings in high-income countries, whereas the vast majority of drowning occurs countries in low middle income countries where action is more urgent, needed. So it is vital that tackling drowning prevention in low middle income countries is done using strategies tailored to the local context. In Sri Lankan context, from the 2014 drowning report published by Life Saving Association Sri Lanka, average 4.4 people per 100,000 of population as shown in the figure. The provincially distributed number is that time 855, 3 persons per day and Sri Lanka was at 12th place from 61 low middle income countries as that time. Then methodology that I use, objectives, strategies, data information collection, identification of drowning, the vision, mission, and objectives of the plan of action. The vision, safest and prosperous waters in Sri Lanka. Mission is to reduce related deaths by 10% annually. Objectives are ensure safety of people who are engaged in water-related activities, build the capacities of first responders, and finally promote water recreational activities through tourism to contribute the national economy. So for that, we have introduced 6 strategies: delivering info safety education, communicating and managing information for water safety, providing life-saving and water safety services, conducting water safety research and development, maximizing economic benefit for tourism through safe water-related activities, and finally, developing regulations for governance of water safety and drowning prevention. So these strategies will cover all 10 actions to prevent drowning as mentioned by WHO. So for that, data and information collected through the mandated organization. So for that, we have introduced a fully structured interview, and also we done a lot of stakeholder workshops and identification of drowning incidents trend for past few years is important to understand the trend and determine who's having risk of drowning, where and how drowning death occurred. Therefore, this study includes unintentional drowning deaths reported in Sri Lanka from 2001 to 2018, excluding 2008 and 2015 based on unavailability of primary data. So implementing modality, I will explain the development of the actions, stakeholder workshop, and the programs that we introduce. Disaster Management Center is the mandated organization to carry out all the DRR activities in Sri Lanka. So for that, for the drowning stakeholder coordination, initially we established a steering committee with public, private, academia, NGOs and INGOs and volunteers, and 5 other subcommittees, and conduct workshops and develop the national plan of actions to mitigate the impact of drowning. So these are some of the photographs that we get it from the workshop itself. Then those are the programs and trainings that we introduced from the National Plan of Action. Info Safety Program for every student at the completion of the program to know basic swimming and water safety skill, also include into school curricula and higher education institutions. Safe water search and rescue, especially for the first responders, for triforces, police, and volunteers. Data surveillance, size, nature of injury, risk factors, population characteristics, informations will be helped to describe the magnitude of the problem, and that will lead to determine the programmatic priorities. Therefore, we have developed a surveillance system and data validation method. Drowning risk profiling, using the data and information through surveillance system, monitor the trend, risk factors and location, conducting mapping exercises in Sri Lanka, and finally develop a database. So the analysis, we done the persons at risk, age group, gender, and the water sources. So from that analysis, we get these findings. Drowning is the leading cause for death age 1 to 14 years of children. Males 3.4 more likely to drown than female, and also age group 25 to 44 having high risk. At the same time, 45 to 65 year of age group. So that means the breadwinner of the family having a lot of risk, and that will impact to national economy as well as the family itself. 14% reduction when compared to 2005 to 2007 average, that is the 2004 drowning report up to now, that 14% reduction happened due to the implementation of plan of action. Canals have greater drowning risk, that of 24%, and as at now, annually to 755 deaths happening. So the discussion, issues, recommendation, conclusions. Issues, there need to be more national and international attention focused on drowning, known as the silent killer, given the limited data available on its true scale and effects of heavy mix. The estimated death toll, as I mentioned, the suicide, homicide, and also boat capsizing have to be included. And the primary source of this in NENTA, disaster database of Sri Lanka, having data, boat capsizing, drowning, heavy rain, and flood separately. Therefore, the calculation and iteration is difficult. And in Sri Lanka, some stakeholder agencies with their organizational mandate were implementing several activities to prevent drowning prevention in Sri Lanka, but lack of integration common approach. The results were not clearly marked, and lack of related data and common data sharing platform was an issue. The conclusion, need the more improvement in governance, institutional coordination, advocacy, resource mobilization by revamping the plan of action and strategies with multi-sectorial approach. Maintaining a drowning surveillance system and developing a common data sharing platform will be definite help in developing a comprehensive drowning risk profile for Sri Lanka, and provide basic swimming training, safety program impact by making mandatory for schools and higher education institutions. Strengthen the capacities of rescuers, and media has to play a major role, make the community aware, since collective measures with adequate information and expertise can bring effective results in mitigating the death by drowning, empowering existing regulations and impose new regulations to prevent death due to drowning and water-related activities through proper monitoring mechanism, beaches, rivers, wells, and other waterways with protection, safety measures, and trained lifeguards of international standard. Also have to communication and marketing strategies to promote Sri Lanka as a safer water recreational destination. These are the references that I used. Thank you.
So what are the measures to be adapted so that you have enlightened that? I think so. We'll go to the next presentation now, but there may be questions from the audience, lot of questions to Mr. Chatura, and we'll give the time a little later after this second presentation. So the second presentation is on the formation of the capacity, formation of a capacity development framework to improve research and innovation in disaster resilience in higher education institutions in Asia. C. Lienage, McDonald R, Amaratunga D, Hyatt E, and Richard Haig. I suppose Mr. Lienage is presenting this. Mr. Lienage?
I will be presenting this, Prof. Siri. How are you? Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity for presenting our research in this symposium. And my name is Dr. Ezri Hayat. I'm a lecturer in Teesside University, and I'm here presenting on behalf of our research team, which include Professor Champika Lianage and Rory MacDonald from University of Central Lancashire, and Professor Dilantia Maratunga and Professor Richard Hay from University of Huddersfield. And the paper that I'm presenting here, titled The Formations of Capacity Development Framework to Improve Research and Innovation in Disaster Resilience in Higher Education Institution in Asia. And I'm aware the title of the paper is rather long, but I hope it does justice in describing what our research is about. And the piece of work that I'm presenting here is part of a €1 million Erasmus Plus funded project called ASCEND, or Advancing Skill Creation to Enhance transformations. And this project was a consortium of 14 universities from Europe and Asia region, 6 countries. And the aim of the project was to strengthen the research and innovation capacity for the development of societal resilience to disaster. And accordingly, the project work packages include provision of support and training to develop skills in leadership, international collaboration, as well as university industry partnerships. And one of the project deliverables that we had to perform was to produce a research and innovative capacity development framework, which is the focus of my presentations today. And the capacity development framework will accordingly encapsulate a holistic approach to exploring the nature of how greater research and innovations can be nurtured, and that capacities can be developed towards building disaster resilience in the regions. With regard to what we did in terms of methodology, we initially performed a systematic literature review that was performed to explore the current role that research and innovation plays in the capacity development for disaster resilience related subject in the selected Asian partner countries. And the focus of the review was on exploring the main factors of research and innovation practice in general, and also specifically for disaster resilient related subject. And the main factors were categorized into 3 main themes, which is system and policy, staff, and skills and training. And these 3 factors were unified into an initial conceptual framework that formed the basis of how to examine research and innovation capacity in the disaster resilient related subjects. And following this up, we performed a roundtable discussions where all members of the ASCENT project team, including members from each of the 8 Asian partner institutions, participated in a 3-round discussion and explored the identified themes in detail. And each of these themes, which can be identified as influences of research and innovations, represent a family of the identified factors that are further paired with the key performance indicators and precise measures for assessing the R&R influences on activities. And we accordingly perform a semi-structured interview with the higher education institution staff. We performed 217 semi-structured interview conducted in Bangladesh, Thailand, and Sri Lanka. And these interviews aim to provide insight into the current context of research and innovation activities at these institutions. We identify also the current gaps in practice, as well as identify the needs for further research and innovation capacity building. And to ensure consistency, a detailed interview guideline together with the analysis template were distributed to partners. And following the semi-structured interview, we perform a baseline survey using a SurveyMonkey platforms. With the SurveyMonkey, we collected 611 responses from academic and research staff from the partners institutions where the survey captures the current level of research and innovation capacities. And the baseline would later guide the development of ASCENT training workshops for the partner institutions, and where we also collect informations data regarding respondents' view on enablers and barriers to research and innovations. Towards the end of the project, we follow up the survey with a follow-up survey where 75 respondents who attended minimum one of the research training that we provided, where we identify and analyze changes and improvement resulting from the intervention provided throughout the project durations. And as mentioned earlier, the systematic literature review process was performed around 3 main themes: the system and policy, staff, and skills and training. And these 3 factors were unified into an initial conceptual framework that formed the basis of how to examine the research and innovations capacity in disaster resilient subject. And the framework development further identified four main components of research and innovation practices within the higher education institutions, which allowed conceptualizations of this practice in identified terms, which include the research method, skills and knowledge, supplementary skills and knowledge, utilizations of university industry partnership, as well as how well the international collaboration has been utilized and performed. And these main components were in turn influenced by identified enablers and barriers of research and innovation practices, where six main categories were identified, including policy, human resource, training, funding, infrastructures, as well as cross-cutting issues. Based on the collected data and analysis that performed, accordingly, we propose a research and innovations capacity development framework as shown here in this slide. And from the research method perspective, 7 research methods were identified as well-known methods, where 8 methods were identified as less known, which the academic needs further training. And the less known supplementary skills which are not directly related to research but will support the research and innovation capacity, will include the entrepreneurships, the funding and financing, research project presentation, as well as problem solving. Okay, and the international cooperation and the university industry partnership were both considered as less known areas for the respondents. Hence, the focus was to identify the types and components which required further assistance and development. And complementing the four main components of the research and innovation practices are the key enablers in the area, which were identified from 6 main aspects of policy, funding, human resource and culture, infrastructure, training, as well as cross-cutting. For example, what we can see, what we found from the policy point of view is that we need to encourage policy that support research and innovation at every level of the development of R&I capacity, and we need policies that kept up to date. And with the funding, for example, the availability of grant and scholarship, as well as support by funding bodies, is necessary as the key enablers toward the R&I capacity development and so forth. And on the opposite, we also identify key barriers, factors that stopping or hindering the R&I capacity to develop further, which include the lack of policy on R&I, the unclear or inadequate policy on research and innovations, as well as a lack of strategic cross-cutting research initiative to promote fundamental and interdisciplinary activities. And all of these in total, we identified 15 enablers and also 16 barriers identified, which accordingly propose as area that will need to be maintained and improved for the research and innovation capacity to develop and flourish. And here, with the last slides, my presentation has concluded. I present here again our proposed research and innovations capacity development framework that we formulate from this research and project. And thank you very much. I welcome any questions that you might have.
Right, again, thank you very much, Esri, for your the interesting presentation. So you have enlightened the different factors which are hindering and which are the supporting factors. I think there may be a lot of questions coming from the audience regarding what are the needs for the capacity development framework to improve research and innovation in the higher education systems. So maybe we can go for some questions if possible. Hashim, can we have some questions? No question. So I have some question in that case. So Esri, now you have started this project when? Is this
We
an ongoing
started,
project or now you have completed this project?
this is a completed project at the moment. We started this project in 2015 and it runs up to end of 2018. Yeah. And yeah, it was a consortium of 14 university, 6 in the Europe, and also 8 in region 6, we call it, based on the Erasmus Plus regulations and guideline, and including Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Thailand.
So is there any differences you have found between the European universities and the Asian universities? What are the barriers in the Asian universities compared to the European universities? And is there any strong recommendations you can be made on regarding this one? I think that you have mentioned about the policies. I don't know that. I think also that the policies will be very, very important.
Yeah. For the area of enablers and barriers, we identify 6 categories, starting with policy, human resource, training, funding, infrastructure, and cross-cutting. For this particular paper and the data that we collected, we did not collect data from the European side, but we collect data from the Asian partner countries. But from the literature review, we can see that one of the highlights findings, the difference between the most of these Asian countries and also the Europe is, for example, the availability of policies and scholarship and funding for grant funding, for example. That's mainly what brings the R&I capacity to flourish further, because we need the support from the institutional level and also from the national level, and that is probably the big homework for the Asian partner countries. That's some of the finding that we got.
Thank you, Esri. I think interesting presentation. Maybe there are questions come future. So Chatura,
Thank you.
I have some question to you. So why you selected this theme? Is it a big problem in Sri Lanka or in other countries, or what is there?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Professor Veerasinghe. Of course, this is the second highest death toll in Sri Lanka, next to road traffic accident. So why I call it as silent killer? The daily 3 persons die, and the lot of risk to the youth and also for the male itself. So that will definitely impact to the national economy and the family itself. So that's why, as a disaster manager, so I choose this subject with the support of the Life Saving Association Sri Lanka and the Life Saving Victoria. So they have supported us. Intervention happened from the minister and the secretary and all the line agencies related to this subject. Also, we get the support for all the public, private, NGOs, INGOs support for that. And we were done a kind of a multi-sectorial approach to mitigate the drowning impact in Sri Lanka.
So are those suicidal or are those accidents?
That's a kind of,
more accidents?
yeah, that's a kind of a good question, because when you come to have a kind of a death reporting incidents and details itself, only the drowning death information collected from drowning itself, but not the homicide or suicide or kind of boat capsizing information included into this death toll. If it is included, this death toll will be huge.
One of the questions that I want to ask you is that there have been quite a lot of initiatives at different levels in terms of creating a national plan and how we can take it forward. Since it has changed hands from different ministries as well as different entities, where does it stand now and how can that be incorporated into the national plan so that we could see results? It's good to see that there is a percentage drop, but then we also have to have a target to ensure that we have zero casualties in the long run. Yeah.
Thank you, Harsh. I think it's a good question too. Now, as you clearly highlighted that the ministry changing rapidly, this year, last year also, the DMC was under several ministries, and the ministers to convene the minister and the policy makers is pretty much difficult, but of course, with the support of the private sector, NGOs, INGOs, at the same time, the Life Saving Association Sri Lanka, they are doing a kind of a marvelous job. So we just wanted to hand in hand with them and to again revamp the existing plan and to sensitize the policymakers to focus on this type of issue which is not much more evident, or rather it have to be emphasized to the policymakers to do something to minimize the drowning death in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Professor Nandasena. Now we'll go on to the third presenter, and the presenter would be Mr. R.R. Jayakodi. The subject would be based on core principles for planning public open spaces to enhance coastal cities' resilience to tsunamis in Sri Lanka. Indeed, a very appropriate topic to talk of, given the circumstances of our country where we have a massive coastal line. Yes, over to the presentation, please.
Hello everyone, my name is Chaturangani Jayakodi. I'm a researcher attached to Global Disaster Resilience Centre, University of Huddersfield, UK. The topic I'm going to present here today is the core principles for planning public open space to enhance coastal cities' resilience to tsunamis in Sri Lanka. So I have structured this presentation into 5 main areas: research context, explaining the research problem and then research gap, a research method, findings, and the conclusion. So the research context, it's on public open spaces. When you see this type of public open space, how do you think that this can contribute to the betterment of the city? Well, it can bring many benefits. It can increase the walkability, livability, and vitality of the city. It can bring economic benefits, social benefits, and environmental benefits, contributing towards the sustainability. So this is the current focus of public open spaces, planning and designing public open spaces. However, the question here today is, can we really use the same public open space for tsunami disaster resilience? If so, how can we use it? How to plan and design for disaster resilience? Because if we are going towards sustainable cities, the sustainable development should encompass the enhancements of the disaster resilience. So this is where I begin my research. I begin my research, and then it was focused down to coastal cities. Then after that for tsunamis, because tsunami is infrequent and unpredictable, but extremely destructive. However, because of its unpredictable nature, allocating resources with the sole purpose of tsunami resilience cannot be considered as sustainable. So can we really use the tsunami disaster resilience measures for multi-purpose? Within this focus, public open space with a multi-purpose for tsunami disaster resilience and for the day-to-day life of the city. And then I have focused down the research to Sri Lankan context, because Sri Lanka is a tsunami-prone country with urban population concentration towards coastal cities, and the unplanned development increased the disaster risk further. So the specific research question is how to plan and design public open space as a strategy to enhance coastal cities resilience to tsunamis in Sri Lanka. So how I answered this research question, I used the grounded theory method. I conducted 72 interviews covering these categories of people, both experts and the communities who were affected by 2004 tsunami. And then I analyzed all this information using grounded theory coding procedure. Then the findings told me an amazing story. Findings told that yes, we can use this public open space for tsunami disaster resilience, but we have to arrange them in a special way. There are three types of public open spaces: beach public open space, inland public open space 1 and 2. Beach public open space means it's located within the beach, tsunami high risk zone, flat terrain, large scale or small scale public open space. We can use it to mitigate the tsunami risk. However, we have to plan this public open space with a minimum physical development, and we can use the natural features protecting the mitigatory measures such as sand dunes and then vegetation. But we have to incorporate with the public open space design. Then we can also use these design features and the orientation of the public open space to slow down and regulate the wave. And then we can also use this beach public open space to direct the emergency evacuation. We have to connect them with the evacuation road network and also linking with the neighboring highlands. And then we can also use this public open space to provide public awareness. How to use it? We have to use the design features to remind the sculptures like that, to remind tsunami and the importance of being proactive with the information code. So that's about beach public open space. So if we move on to the second type of public open space, inland POS 1. These are located inland, yet within the tsunami risk zone, flat terrain. It's large scale and small scale, both can be used for tsunami disaster resilience. To mitigate, we can use them to mitigate the tsunami risk by using the design features and the orientation to slow down and regulate the wave, which means the earth bonds, steps of these public open space and the vegetation and the orientation can be used to slow down and regulate the wave. And then the large scale public open space, we can use it for the, we can link them with the evacuation road network and with the neighboring highland, and it can work as a emergency evacuation directing point, the small scale one, and the large scale one for the emergency evacuation distribution point by linking it with then the public transportation network also. And then the third type of public open space, inland POS 2. These are located inland, out of the tsunami risk zone on an elevated platform. It can be even an elevated platform. And then mountainous terrain. Here only large scale public open space. We can use them as emergency evacuation gathering place. With the minimum physical development, we have to use them with a design as a loose space, and then space for temporary shelter in an immediate recovery. And then we can design within the walking distance and with the inclusive design features. And then apart from that, this third type of public open space we can use to provide basic services and facilities in emergency response by linking them with community centers and by linking them with access locations and the other service providers. So likewise, we can use these three types of public open spaces in three different ways. However, we have to follow 5 core principles in order to get these uses. We have the risk zonation should guide the places for public open spaces and the benefits involved. And then different public open space have different uses depending on the location and size, as I explained. Then the terrain and topographic character can guide the tsunami GRR uses. And most importantly, by networking them together, all these three types of public open spaces, it can work as a GRR passage. And then the last one but not least, the this public open space can be used for the multi-purpose, which means in the day-to-day life, it serves the normal day-to-day life of the city. But in an emergency situation, in a tsunami situation, it can be converted to a disaster risk reduction passage. So by using these 5 core principles, there are many benefits involved. Benefits of disaster risk sensitive planning, and then public open spaces located within the tsunami risk zone can be used to aware people. This is another major challenge in Sri Lanka, how to aware people. So we can use this public open space to aware people, and then it can bring many benefits. The mountainous terrain, we can use even the artificial elevated platforms. There's a concept called tsunami mounts. We can use these concepts here with the use of the terrain and topographic characters. And then it also, by using different public open spaces for different types of users, it has the ability to increase the capacity of tsunami safe locations with the less cost, and ability to provide tsunami awareness in day-to-day life, as I explained before, and then ability to mitigate the tsunami risk. And also by using them for multi-purpose, serving both sustainability and tsunami disaster resilience, it has the ability to strengthen the tsunami disaster management in cities with a less cost and less resources. And it can get the highest and best use of the available resources. And also it has the ability to negotiate the disaster management demands among the other demands of the city. And by networking, it can again benefit the disaster risk sensitive planning, and it works as a system. So there are other benefits of using the diverse of public open spaces with a network, which can increase the walkability. So these are the 5 core principles within the whole framework. I have explained only the 5 core principles. There are other areas to explore within the whole framework. But the 5 core principles brought you the basic idea of using these public open space for tsunami disaster resilience. So 3 types of public open spaces, we can use them in a 3 different ways, but we have to plan them using a special way by following 5 core principles. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you very much, Chaturangani, and it was very informative. If I may also ask you a few questions on your presentation, is that how much has this been incorporated with the Urban Development Authority, and how much has this been institutionalized with the district development planning?
Thank you for the question. Actually, this is a conceptual based research, and this has not been implemented yet. The answer is because currently the PQRS within Sri Lanka, when they are allocating public open spaces, they normally consider only the accessibility. If it's accessible within the road network, that is the main necessity of allocating a public open space. But currently, when they're allocating this public open space in Sri Lanka, they do not consider the disaster resilience features. So this is what we need to promote and need to be incorporated within the policy context, but haven't done yet. So I hope I answered the question.
Yes, I think this is what the symposiums are, which we could take up to the policy decisions as well. And when you also talk about these open spaces, currently it also would help the current situation we are in, the pandemic itself, where so there is a value addition to these ideas that you have brought in. Is there also in the context of vertical evacuation, because you would also see most of the 1,340 kilometers of coastline that we have, we would have schools, we would have hotels. So one is to suggest the open space, but secondly is how you can integrate it to the existing development process as well.
Yes, that's a very valid point, because this public open space network will not run in an isolation manner. This need to be well connected with the local evacuation road network, and as well as where if the with the time permits in the evacuation, and considering the population density, this network need to be well connected with the vertical evacuation. It's actually a sub points we have identified here.
Thank you so much, Chaturangani. Yes, Professor, over to you.
Yes, I think, thank you, Chaturangani. Just a small question. How about the elevation when you are talking about this public places?
Yes, the elevation does matter, because if the public open space is located in an elevated platform, which means out of the tsunami risk, then we can use it for the emergency evacuation, sheltering and gathering. But if it's in a low terrain, of course, then it's tsunami moderate or high risk zone, then these need to be allocated only for the emergency evacuation directing point and as a distribution point.
Okay, thank you. Since we are going out of time, let us go to the next presentation. It is about the information platform for chemical disaster management and impact assessments. Kaushalya, Disanayaka, and CLW Preparedness.
I'm Gayani Kaushalya from National Building Research Organization, and my presentation is on information platform for chemical disaster management and impact assessment. Many studies conducted by NBRO throughout past few years have shown an increasing trend of industrial and facility-related incidents in Sri Lanka ended up as chemical disasters during the past 2 decades. This graph shows the number of recorded chemical disaster incidents occurred in each year, starting from 2006 to 2019, where you can see a clear increase in trend. However, this graph is plotted using available information only. Hence, the actual number of incidents occurred may be greater than this recorded number of incidents in each year. Most of these scenarios have commonly occurred in industries involving chemicals as raw materials, products, byproducts, or waste. When we analyze the available information in deeper, we have identified the trends of industrial and facility-related chemical disaster incidents with respect to industrial category. There you can see that the considerable trend in disaster incident occurrence is shown by the industry category number 20, that is manufacturing of chemicals and chemical products sector. Furthermore, industry category 10, manufacture of food products, 19, manufacture of coke and refined petroleum products, 22, manufacture of rubber and plastic products have shown a relatively higher trend of industrial and facility-related chemical disaster incident occurrence. In further analysis of the occurred incidents, we have observed these trends as well. When we consider the incident sources, manufacturing and material formulation installations has been highly subjected to chemical disaster incidents compared to material storage facilities and transportation media as shown in figure 3. On the other hand, by figure 4, you can observe that the fire is the most commonly occurring causative factor for the chemical disaster incidents compared with explosions, leakages, and accidental spills. The damage caused by these events was limited to industrial premises and nearest surrounding, or through relatively longer distances during severe fires and explosions. However, there were no proper methodology developed to assess the damage and the risk of chemical disasters in Sri Lanka. The main reason behind this condition is the unavailability of a proper data management system to make use of a reliable assessment methodology. Therefore, the objective of this project was the development of a comprehensive and user-friendly database as a support for the assessment of chemical disasters on industries and services related for the further studies, researchers, regulatory purposes using international standards with industrial and related facility information to make aware the general community. The framework of the assessment methodology incorporated into this study can be briefly illustrated as per this figure. In the initial stage of the assessment methodology, we identify chemicals imported to Sri Lanka and prioritize these chemicals according to their hazardousness based on the international standards. In order to handle this information related to chemicals, we have developed a chemical database. The next step of the methodology is selecting an industry where one or few identified hazardous chemicals are used. In order to handle information related to industries, we have developed an industrial database. There can be many types of chemicals utilized within an industry. Hence, prioritizing chemicals within the assessing industry is essential. For this, information related to industries and information related to chemicals have to be incorporated within one system. Hence, our final information platform is developed to facilitate all such necessary information where the results of the assessment can be delivered in visual format with the aid of Google Mapping and GIS. Finally, the risk due to chemicals will be assessed and the possible impacts will be identified. Let's move into database development methodology. Before finalizing the format and the types of information to be gathered and stored within our system, many locally available and internationally utilizing databases related to both chemicals and industries were studied. Furthermore, the requirements in assessing the chemical disaster risk were considered. Therefore, many information related to industries and chemicals are incorporated within this platform. Thereafter, necessary information related to chemicals and industries were extracted from international literature and several organizations who have had readily available different kinds of necessary information. Our intention is to produce one common platform to handle all the necessary information to handle emergency situations in an industry and share it among responsible organizations such as government agencies, service providers, and industries, with upgrading along with some limited access to the general public. Database handling is user-friendly. You can screen the industry by province, district, and industry category as well. Once when you have selected the industry, you can immediately get the emergency contact information of that industry. Then you can go to the detailed information sheet of the industry by clicking on Go to Detailed Sheet. Detailed information sheet has many information related to industry. As example, general information such as province, district, and the nature of the industry. Apart from the general information, You can find out necessary information related to chemicals within the detail sheet, along with the immediately applicable evacuation distances in an incident of fire or spillage. In order to achieve more accurate industry and incident-specific evacuation distances, we have to run a model using the information available within the platform. Then we can get an industry and incident-specific risk profile, which gives the risk zones around the industry. This risk profile can be interpreted within a Google map, where we can clearly identify the evacuation areas and distances. As per the international standards, the evacuation zone is given in the orange color. When we come to the conclusions, the information platform can be used to assess the risk factor of each industry, which is highly usable in disaster risk assessment. Similarly, in an emergency, the general public may acquire a basic understanding of the risk due to chemicals involved within the industry and safety measures for neighboring communities, such as the need for evacuation. Furthermore, the responsible government organizations related to industrial safety and disaster management may acquire a comprehensive understanding of the access routes, high-risk areas, safety measures, and possible vulnerability. Hence, we can conclude that this data platform is useful for disaster management and impact assessment, leading to the reduction of chemical disaster impacts. Thank you.
Right, thank you for the interesting presentation. I think new outlook you are giving about the chemicals and the chemicals hazards, how to handle with the hazards, and I think this platform can be, I think, very. Is there any questions? So now, according to your these findings, the most hazardous chemicals are whether they are related with the, I mean, the explosions or with any other sort of these things. How you can classify these chemicals according to different type of, I mean, the this different type of this action.
Depending on the hazardness of specific chemical, it depends. Let's say that there is a chemical which is highly prone to fires. It is more regularly subjected to fires. Or on the other hand, if a chemical is toxic, it is not subjected to fire, but when during a spillage or release, it is very toxic to the people. So it is something differently affect to the environment.
Kaushalya, have you have you in any way related this to something that happened in Beirut in August? How bad it could be if it happens in Sri Lanka? And the other is, do we have, through your research, have you figured out how much chemicals that come into Sri Lanka and how much is used and how much is stocked? And the third question would be, how hazardous is it to the rivers that we have?
Yes. About the Beirut incident,
what about
we have assessed the entire incident, but have not really considered how it would affect Sri Lanka, but identified few occasions where such incidents can occur, where we have used the same kind of chemicals. In such cases, the second question links with this scenario as well. When we consider about the chemical importation to Sri Lanka, we don't have any clear information on that. That is why basically we have in the first place decided to develop this database where we can store all this necessary information. Let's say there are many chemicals imported to Sri Lanka, but some of the chemicals are imported using different trade names, or some of the information are not readily available to extract. So in that case, we have to go in root bases to go to the industry and ask what are the chemicals you are using and how much of chemicals you are storing. In that kind of incidents, only we can get an idea about the number of the amount of chemical imported to Sri Lanka and the number of chemicals within Sri Lanka. So that our main focus of developing this database platform is also to gather all those necessary information. As the first step, we have identified all the necessary information, and as for further step of this research, we are planning to highlight the need of disclosing all this necessary information only to the regulatory purposes and all these responsible organizations.
Okay, I think thank you very much, Kaushal, for the interesting presentation. So let us. It is by the inventory survey of slope failures in Sri Lanka by Yang P. Yang.
Hello everyone. I'm Hasali Hemasinghe from Sri Lanka, and are Dr. Yang, Mr. Nishikawa, and Dr. Jayatisa. Today I'm going to present the output of our study, and the study was inventory survey of slope failures in Sri Lanka. When we consider the Sri Lankan situation, landslide is one of the major and frequent natural hazards that we can have experienced in Sri Lanka. And most of landslides are first-time shallow and fast-moving slope failures, either on a steep, natural, or cut soil slope. They are caused significant damages on lives and properties. This situation has become a real constraint to any development in the country. And as the national focal point of the landslide-related studies in the country, National Building Research Organization has taken many approaches to identify the slopes that are susceptible to landslide and has taken many efforts to reduce and manage the associated risk. A technical cooperation project between JICA and NBRO called Project for Capacity Strengthening on Development of Non-Structural Measures for Landslide Risk Reduction, which is known as also SABO project, can be considered as one of the such attempts. And as a part of this project, an inventory survey of recent slope failure disasters were conducted. Then the major objectives of this study was to identify the areas subjected to fast-moving slope failures. Second one is to document the extent of landslide phenomena in area ranging from small to large watersheds and from region to state or nation level. Third one is to investigate the distribution type and pattern of landslide or slope failure in relation to morphological characteristics. And fourth one is to develop a simple topographical model for predicting and mapping slope failure hazard areas and their affected areas. Actually, landslide inventory survey can be considered as a preliminary step towards susceptibility, hazard, and risk assessment. When consider the methodology that we followed during this process, as the first step, collecting and reviewing of all reports of previous landslide events were done. And the data source that we use to collect landslide data are listed below. Then supplemented the above mentioned inventory record sheets through satellite images and air photo interpretations, as well as geological and topographical analysis. Then the field investigation was conducted to collect further data as necessary. Then the collected data was analyzed to find the relations of following characteristics with the slope failure occurrences. Those are slope steepness, slope height, slope landform, surface material, runout distance of slope failures, and width of the displaced mass. According to the results of the landslide inventory analysis, following characteristics were identified. First one is slope steepness. According to the analysis, most of the landslides occur in the slope in between 25 to 45 degrees. When consider the slope height, most of the slope failures occurs with the 5-meter height slopes. When consider the slope landform, most of the slope failures were occurred in concave slopes. When consider the slope materials, 90% of the analysis slope failures were occurred in colloidal soil. This is the output of runout distance analysis, and according to that, in most of slope failure, slope materials are spread within twice the height of a steep slope up to 100-meter distance from the bottom of the steep slope. When consider the width of displaced mass, it is almost equal to width of the landslide initiation area. Then based on the analysis result, a simplified topographical model to predict the slope failures were developed. According to that, a slope at risk of slope failure damage is defined as a slope which has slope gradient of 25 to 45 degrees and slope height is more than 5 meters and the maximum runout distance is less than twice the height of slope failure with a limit of 100 meters. According to the results of the analysis, we can conclude that slope failures are major and frequent hazard in Sri Lanka, and they occur mostly on steep slopes of colloidal and residual soils during heavy rainfall. Many of steep concave hill slopes covered with thick colloidal soils are the sites of highly potential slope failures. Slope failures are related strongly to slope steepness and slope height and their runout distance to the height of slope failure areas. The developed topographical model can be used to quickly locate slope failure hazard areas at site-specific level and to estimate their runout if they occur with the following threshold topographical conditions. Those are, the first one is a steep soil slope having a gradient of 25 to 45 and a height of 5 meters or more. And the second one is an area located within twice the height of a steep slope but less than 100 meters from the bottom of the steep slope. And the fourth conclusion is identification of slope failure hazard areas and estimation of associated runout distance are the first step towards an analysis and assessment of the potential hazard and risk to population and infrastructure, as well as new development of the land use planning. And those are my findings of our research. And thank you for your kind attention.
Yes, thank you for the interesting presentation about this slope and the boundaries. I think very interesting presentation. I think we don't have still any questions. We'll go to the next presentation and then we'll take up again any questions coming from your presentation. So the next one is about the transboundary river governance practices for flood risk practices in Europe. It's a review by Clegg, Richard Hake and Dilanthi Amarutunga.
I'm going to be presenting the results of a literature review that was conducted on the topic of transboundary river governance and flood management in the European context. This was conducted by the Global Disaster Resilience Centre at the University of Huddersfield. Transboundary river basins are characterised by the crossing of borders, whether that's an international border between countries or an administrative border within a country. Transboundary rivers can present particularly challenging governance problems. This is because rivers link different places together and create interdependencies between them. In river and flood management, there are already a very diverse set of actors involved, but in a transboundary river setting, these actors become multiplied. The principles of integrated water resource management suggest to us that rivers should be managed at the basin level to be most effective. And therefore, in a transboundary basin, many different actors located in different jurisdictions need to be able to coordinate. Transboundary coordination can be particularly important for early warning, for example, in ensuring that those at risk receive a warning of potential flooding that might be detected upstream. The Ciliwung River on the island of Java in Indonesia is an example of a transboundary river that crosses several administrative borders. The heavily populated basin suffers from severe flooding on a very frequent basis. The project, Mitigating Hydrometeorological Hazard Impacts through Improved Transboundary River Management, aims to develop an improved river governance plan to achieve better and more coherent management of flooding within the basin. The project is a collaborative initiative between the University of Huddersfield and Swansea University in the UK and the Institute of Technology Bandung and the School of Meteorology, Climatology and Geophysics in Indonesia. The project is also partnered with several national and provincial institutions, such as the Disaster Management Agency of Indonesia and the Basin Water Authority for the Ciliwung Cisadane Basin. There is little literature available on transboundary river management in the context of Indonesia. Therefore, to inform the project on the nature of transboundary river and flood management issues, a review of practices in the European Union was conducted. Europe was chosen for study for several reasons. As the pink area on the image on the right indicates, Europe has a large number of international transboundary basins and has a long history of international water sharing. The region is also heavily impacted by flooding. For example, in 2013, large parts of Central Europe experienced severe flooding, which cost estimated damages of between 11 and 16 billion euros. Europe therefore provides a potentially insightful case for transboundary river and flood management, and provides a useful starting point for the project. A review of the literature was conducted, and this was structured around the Framework for International Water Sharing, which was proposed by Savané and van der Zaag. This framework suggests that the sharing of international waters is supported by three separate pillars: legal and institutional, political, and technical or operational pillars. For each different pillar, key concepts relevant to flood risk management were identified. For example, for the legal and institutional aspects, legal frameworks and the types of coordinating institutions were investigated. And for the operational pillar, we looked at modes of technical cooperation and information sharing. So what did the review find? It was found that legal frameworks are a dominant feature and play an important role in European transboundary river management. There is a multi-layered legal system, starting with international laws such as the United Nations Water Convention, and then EU laws and directives which apply to all member states. For individual basins, there may also be further bi- or multilateral agreements in place, although they do not exist in all basins. Member states then have their own laws. The benefits of such a system are that it places a requirement on states to comply. The EU framework provides overarching guidance, but individual countries and basins can also address their own unique needs through additional measures. As noted earlier, there are many actors involved in flood and water management, and this review showed several ways coordination is achieved between them in Europe. There are various mechanisms at different levels of governance. Basin organisations are a key feature of this, that provide a space for different actors to come together. But one of the potential issues highlighted within the literature is that they vary in power and capacity, so some organisations are more effective than others. There may be further sub-basin coordination mechanisms, such as catchment partnerships, that may be more community-focused and participatory. Although again, the issue highlighted in the literature is how these smaller scale initiatives link and feed into the wider river basin district level planning. In terms of political aspects then, the EU is considered to have provided a useful overarching framework for transboundary river management that has helped to create consistency in approaches. But while this has addressed issues relating to divergent river management across borders, there remain several challenges. Some countries have the belief that they should be self-reliant, for example during emergency management, and sometimes they are often not willing to cooperate with others. And although that there are many similarities between EU countries, differences in power and capacity can still make coordination difficult. A further issue is sectoral fragmentation. This regards the fact that as water management has become increasingly basin-focused, there may be greater disparities created with other relevant but non-basin oriented sectors, such as spatial planning, for example. Information and data sharing can be of great importance in managing transboundary basins and for early warning. The review revealed several ways this is achieved in Europe. There is, for example, the Wise Water portal that collates data on water resources and makes it available online. The European Flood Alert System, or EFAS, provides pan-European flood forecasts, which enables transboundary flood warnings. Joint research projects have also played an important role in developing technical cooperation between countries. In terms of climate change adaptation, the literature notes that although climate change adaptation has been gaining increasing attention, it is not widely considered as a transboundary issue. Some basins have seen greater progress than others. This progress has largely been due to the initiatives of basin organisations, as climate change does not appear widely in EU directives. This may be one of the reasons it has received less attention. So what have we learnt from this review, and what are the implications? The European example highlights how an overarching body, the EU, has helped to achieve a certain level of consistency in river management, and how it has fostered greater coordination through the requirements of its laws and directives. Multiple and diverse coordination mechanisms are also a key feature. Therefore, in our Indonesian study, we will be asking whether similar approaches will be suitable, or how similar effects may be achieved. The literature points to the dangers of transferring approaches directly from one place to another, as the context and needs can vary greatly. Therefore, this will need to be carefully considered within our plan. The review also highlights some ongoing challenges that we may also want to explore in the Indonesian context. For example, how climate change adaptation and participation are addressed, and how innovative solutions may be required for these aspects. Finally, many of the successes of transboundary coordination in the European Union have taken considerable time to establish. Therefore, we will be looking at how the foundations for cooperation may be established in the governance plan to ensure sustainable cooperation for the future. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for the interesting presentation about the transboundary problems. So, maybe you have any questions for that about the transboundary?
Georgina, there is a comment, and I think you also have responded to that with regards to the Mekong River. And I think it's also very relevant to Sri Lanka too, because one is that when the water does come through the river from the hills, and then it comes down to the industrial districts, then it floods. But is there any way in which where there can be water retention en route? Are those things that being looked into, or is it that in your study that you did about Indonesia that you do not see where there are flooding or where you could retain the water or cascading tanks or something like that?
Yeah, thank you. I think the water retention issue is an interesting one. I think there are some sort of retention ponds in place, and obviously those can be quite a contentious area for transboundary situations if the upstream area has the sort of control of the water flow, which can impact the downstream. So yeah, water retention is definitely a key issue we're going to be looking at.
Asked that the water a problem by 2020. Agriculture is the major users of the water, but there are other industries and other things are coming up now. So what is your opinion about that with the European experiences and the Asian experiences? Now, how the water sharing principles or something, have you thought about that in your study?
Yeah, so when we were doing the review, although our study is focused on the flooding side of things, yes, there is a lot of literature already, particularly on sort of water resource sharing. And as the drought issue obviously may increase in particularly Mediterranean areas in Europe, there is some research starting to come through on that sort of issue, how we're going to manage the water flows then. And it's potentially an area suggesting that it might cause some sort of conflict. Thank you.
So thank you for the presentation. I think we are now running out of time. So that I think in this session, I think what we can say, Hashim. So we had interesting 6 presentations. So they have touched up the different areas. especially the Chatura has talked about the drowning and these things, what are the accidentally happening with the water. Then the capacity development in the universities, that has been very nicely represented by Hague, by Esri. And the core principles of planning public open spaces. I think it's a new area that has been put some thought onto that, how to make the tsunami evacuation sites and how to use the dual usage, like the hybrid usage for the disaster management as well as the recreation aspects. And then we information platform on the chemical disaster. I think very interesting one. This is the disasters going up and up. I think in future a lot of chemicals are using. Even we can see the chemicals has made a lot of fighting problems in the world now. Even in the agriculture sector, we see that a lot of fertilizers are coming up and they put in the groundwaters, and there are a lot of conflicts coming up with the agriculturists and the chemical people, chemical industries, and they are coming up. So it's a important, I think, area that has been touched. Then the slope, I mean, about the slope protection for failure, I think that was very interesting presentation like that. Then we talk about this transboundary water issues, and that might be the big conflicts. Big disasters might come up in future related to water. So there are the focus of there, I think. So very interesting presentation. I think we have enjoyed very much of your presentation. We wish you all the best. So that we are going to now conclude the session with my co-chair, Mr. Hashim. You have anything to mention?
I'm good, Chairman. I'm good. And thank you so much for those presentations and for the participants and for the questions. Thank you.
So thank you for all the presenters, all the participants, and my co-chair and all the supporters. I think we have enjoyed this session very much. And thank you again, all of you, and wish you good evening or good night in some places, maybe the good day, good afternoon. Thank you so much for everybody. Thank you. So we'll close the session with that.